Hi there, how are you doing today? In this video, we'll talk about sequences. So, what are sequences? A sequence is a database object in Oracle which can be used to get the sequence of values always. However, there are several attributes which can be used even if you want to recycle the values. Alright, so let's get started. So, we'll create a sequence, create sequence, and I'll say sequence emp underscore sk, which is nothing but like surrogate key usually we say, or we can say that SQL sequence implies sequence, and it has properties like start with 1, increment by 1, cache 100, let's say, and then cycle or no cycle, right? So these are some attributes that we have. So what does it mean, right? So we are saying that create a sequence which is an object and its value should be stored. Then onwards, as and when we call this object, we will always get the value incremented by 1, which means that let's say that last time when we call it, we have got the value as 1. And second time when we call the same sequence once again, it is going to get 1 plus 1, 2, and 2 plus 1, 3. Likewise, it keeps incrementing by 1. We can specify 5. If we say 5, that means 1 plus 5, 6. And second time when we call it, it's going to be like, 5 plus 6, sorry, 5 6 plus 5, it's going to be 11, and then 11 plus 5, 16. Likewise, it's going to keep increasing. And then we are saying that cache 100. This means that how many values are we intending to cache. Let's say that your operation requires huge number of sequence values to be returned as soon as possible. If you specify start with 1 and then increment by 1 and then no cache, that means that you're not going to cache any sequence numbers in the memory. That means for each and every row that you're trying to insert into the database, it is going to call the sequence once to get the value, which means that technically it is going to degrade your SQL performance while inserting the data. Usually this happens with the batch operations. In such kind of cases, we can always specify like how many values do you want to cache. So that like if I say 100, always it will have 100 values in the cache. That means that whenever you want the next value, it no need to go and execute the sequence and then get the next value. Instead, it can take one of the value from the cache in the ascending order, right? uh, but it has some downsides as well. In case if you cache it, let's say that like whenever you restart the database, whatever the previous 100 values that you have cached, all those things are lost. That means that like we have cached 100 and we have executed all the way till 99, and then only one value is in the cache, and let's say that like 100, and then the database has been reset. When restart the database, it is going to cache all the way from 101 or like uh, to 200 values. So it will not guarantee you to get the sequential value next time when you call it. In case if you have cached the values and the database has restarted, what are the values you have cached are going to be lost. Similarly, we have something called cycle and no cycle. Cycle means like the sequence reaches certain point, it's going to come back to the starting value. That's called cycle. If you say no cycle, that means that never go back to the starting value, always keep incrementing by 1. And there is something called as max value. We can say that some number, right? So that means like the sequence can continue to generate one by one values up to this number. Likewise, there is no restriction. This is just one example. I have entered the value, right? So likewise, it can keep incrementing the values up to this first place. So create sequence emp underscore suk, and if I just create this, what happens is like it doesn't have any maximum value and it starts by default with 1. It's going to be increment y, right? So let's see that. So there is a sequence that is already existing. I'll just drop sequence emp underscore suk, quickly drop this, and then I'll recreate it, and let's check the sequence, right? So start from user underscore sequences q. um, so here we have, and if you look at, here is the sequence that we are looking for, emp underscore seq, and if you look at the max value is way higher than what I mentioned above, right? And if you look at the minimum value, it starts with 1. Minimum value is nothing but starting with 1, and then it is always going to be incremented by 1. Cycle flag says n, that means that it is not going to be recycled back to the starting value at any cost. And then order by nothing. And then if you see that cache size is 20, which means that by default it is going to cache up to 20 values always in the memory, and then last number is 1. That means that last time when we have executed, what was the value, and we can see that this is 1, right? So they're looking at, right? So this is something where I created it without specifying any attribute, right? So we'll drop it, and then we'll try to create manually with specifying what are the attributes that we want. So I'll just drop this, and then I'll call this once again, and it says that no cycle C by CLE. It has been created. And if we go to the all underscore sequences once again, and then let's look at this. So here we can see that it's starting with 1, and the number is lesser because I have specified a lesser number here, which is the maximum number up to which like it can keep extending the values. And then increment by, if you see that it is 5, that means that every time you call it, it's going to increment by 5 values. And then caches is 100. Earlier it was like 10, 20 by default. Now we can look at that, this is having 100 values, and then the last time when this was executed, it was having 1. All right. So this is how we create the sequence, and these are different options. Now, how do we call the sequence, right? So we can always say that select emp underscore suq dot next val, and then I just called it before, emp underscore suq dot curval from dual is a dummy table which we can use in this case. If you see, the current value is 1 and the next value is 1. If we call it once again, now look at what happens, right? So it is 6 6. That means that the value is incremented by 5. So earlier we had 1, and now it is incremented by 5. That means that 1 plus 5 6. So that is the current value, and that is the next value when you call it. So if I keep calling the current value once again, it will always give me the same value, right? Whereas if I just change and I remove this current value, what actually, all right, and then we'll call this next value once again. So because this is part of the same execution, though we are calling it 2 times, it is giving us the same value 16 16, and at the same time the current value is also remaining same, right? So this is how we are going to call the current value and next value will give us what is the next value that's going to come up, and the current value is like what is the current value that we already have, right? So the moment you call both of them together, it is always going to give you the same value, and right now we are at 16, right? So now this is something often people are facing, like, what if we want to reset the sequence now to get started with 1 always, and then increment by 1 once again? So there's no straightforward way. So what we have to do is alter sequence emp underscore increment by, and then we'll say that now I want to reset it. So I'll say that minus 15. I'll just execute this. Alter q spelling. Now if you've been increment, it is increment by 15. Right now the value what I have in the current value is 16. So if I just run the next value, it is going to be like 16 minus 15, that's going to be 1, right? Let's look at this. Okay, now if we try to run it once again, it says that the sequence cannot go below the minimum value, because we said that start with, and the current value in the sequence is 1, right? And if we try to run the same next value once again, so what it is going to do, 1 minus 15, which is going to be like 14, but 14 is less than 1. That means that we are going to go beyond or lesser than the minimum value, hence it is throwing this error, right? Now what I'll do is I'll say that increment, and now we call this, and you can, so here on notes it is going to increment, right? So this is how we can reset the sequence. There is no direct way of resetting the sequence values. However, it is not something like we can do within the oltp applications, because we usually use the sequence values while populating the primary key values. That means resetting the sequence values is going to cause you duplicated values, and ultimately primary key will throw an error. But when it comes to the OLAP systems where you have used a sequence and populated long values, and then you're going to do the historical load once again, and you want to start the sequence value all the way from starting once again, probably those cases you may want to use, you may want to reset the sequence if it is needed, but definitely not applicable, right? So as I mean, like, feel free to check with other options, like you can change this to cycle, and then you can specify the max value. So what it will do is, like, as you keep incrementing, whenever it reaches the maximum value, to the one, the moment it reaches the maximum value, because we have specified cycle. In case we are not able to resolve it, feel free to comment it in on this video, work it out. Till then, have a good day. Bye bye.